Yosemite is breathtaking, but its beauty hides a deadly reality. I'm Nathan Cole, and today I'm giving you the heads up that could save your life on your next visit to the park. From a med student who stepped into the river for a quick picture to a teacher standing beneath El Cap just to admire the granite and somehow end up in the worst ways imaginable. It was July 18th, 2016. The temperature hit 94 degrees in the valley that afternoon. It was the kind of hot day in Yosemite where crowds pack every trail, all trying to get the perfect photo for their social media. The Merced River above Vernal Fall was doing its normal thing, moving fast and quiet over the granite rocks. Anna Claire Varelli was there, caught in the middle of that summer crowd. She was 24, a total brainiac in her second year of med school. She was the mom of her friend group. You know the type, carries a legit first aid kit in her bag, texts everyone when she lands, and is constantly stressed about her friend's safety. She was the last person you'd ever expect to do something reckless. But, as I've learned, nature doesn't give a damn how organized or smart you are. She was there with her friend Maddie and a few others. They rented an Airbnb and drove a borrowed car to get there. By the middle of the afternoon, they were worn out and very hot. They stopped at the Silver Apron, right above the waterfall. Now, everyone who went there has seen those signs. Park rangers plaster them everywhere, telling you not to wade in the river. It's not a suggestion, folks. It's a "you will die" warning. Anna Claire walked past at least 2 of those signs that morning. She probably thought a quick look wouldn't hurt. Honestly, I've been guilty of doing that kind of thing myself. The water looked like a calm, shallow pool. You can see why people get fooled. She told her friends she was just going to step in for a photo. Her friend actually told her not to do it. However, according to their testimonies, Anna ignored them. She stepped in. However, that solid granite was actually coated in a layer of invisible slimy algae. And as she put her foot down, the rock gave out, and she lost her footing immediately. Anna didn't fall gracefully. She slammed down hard on her hip. The current is like a conveyor belt to nowhere. It caught her instantly. Her friends tried to grab her arm and backpack, but the force of that water, it's like being dragged by a freight train. They couldn't hold on. Other hikers just watched, frozen, realizing that stepping in would just make it a group tragedy. Witnesses watched as Anna hit a ledge, rolled, and went over the edge of Vernal Fall. It is a nightmare to think about, especially since her friends watched the final seconds of her life. Search and rescue teams reached the area in 34 minutes, which is incredibly fast, but it was already too late. They found her the next morning. The autopsy report showed blunt trauma, broken ribs, and a fractured collarbone. The impact from the fall alone would have been fatal, even without the drowning. It is dark to say, but there is some mercy in knowing she likely felt nothing after that first hit. Afterward, the park issued a standard warning about waiting, but let's be honest, hardly anyone reads those signs. Her friends were left to deal with the aftermath. That final image of Anna didn't come from a phone that went over the falls with her. One of her friends had been taking photos from the bank just seconds before she stepped into the water, and the last shot in that burst shows Anna barefoot, moving toward the river with one hand slightly out for balance. And that frame ended up becoming the last image anyone had of her alive. And what gets me is how ordinary it looked. No panic, no sign of what was about to happen, just one casual step toward a place that had already killed people before her. The next story is just as brutal in a completely different way, because that victim never went near the water at all. She was simply standing in the wrong spot in Yosemite when a massive tree limb came down without warning. It was September 9th, 2019, and Yosemite felt unsettled. The afternoon was warm, but the wind kept whipping through the pines, sending needles skittering across the trail. Near Curry Village, the usual crowd was bustling about, snapping photos, filling water bottles, and soaking up the last of the light before dinner. Among them was 37-year-old Eleanor Valtierra, a payroll manager from Phoenix. She had come to the park seeking a reset after a brutal year that included a divorce and a family health crisis. This trip was meant to be her escape, nothing technical, just a few days of quiet, simple hiking to help her breathe again. That afternoon, Eleanor and her sister Mara decided on a short, easy walk near the river. It was the kind of path thousands of visitors stroll down every week, where you naturally let your guard down because it feels safe. She wasn't scrambling over rocks or pushing her luck. She was doing the most ordinary thing imaginable: Earlier that day, park staff had put up warnings about drought-stressed trees that could fall at any moment. But like most general safety advice, the message just kind of faded into the background noise. We always hear the word careful so often that it eventually loses all its weight. By late afternoon, the wind grew restless, and you could hear the trees groaning, that dry, creaking sound that no one really thinks twice about until it's too late. Mara stepped a few feet aside to fix her hair, while Eleanor stood beneath a massive, aging pine, laughing about how she always looked awkward in photos. Then, a crack shattered the air. It wasn't some slow-motion cinematic warning. It was just one sharp, ugly snap. A dead limb, heavy as a telephone pole, had finally let go of the canopy. It didn't sway or hesitate, it just dropped like a stone. Mara turned in time to scream, but Eleanor never stood a chance. The branch struck her with enough force to send her face first into the dirt, causing immediate and fatal trauma. Despite the desperate, frantic efforts of nearby hikers to help, there was nothing to be done. That's what makes this case so hard to shake. Eleanor didn't ignore a barrier. She didn't go off trail. She didn't take some stupid risk for a photo. She just stood in the wrong place, under the wrong tree. At the exact moment a dead limb finally gave out. The official report called it an accident. Blunt force injuries from a falling tree limb. The park closed the trail and removed more hazardous limbs shortly after, but that doesn't change the outcome. After everything she'd survived that year, after finally taking a trip that was supposed to help her feel like herself again, she ended up dying on one of the easiest walks in the park. And honestly, that's scarier to me than any cliffside fall, because there was no big mistake to learn from. Just a few random seconds of terrible luck. And somehow, the next case is even more brutal, because this time, it wasn't a casual visitor on an easy trail. It was a woman coming down from El Capitan itself after surviving the climb, only for everything to go wrong on the descent. It was September 14th, 2022. The top of El Capitan was cooling off, and that weird flat orange light was hitting the valley, making the granite look sharp and unforgiving. If you've ever climbed, you know the feeling. You're exhausted, the light is dying, and you just want to get back to the car. Mara Elise Calderon was 29, a structural engineer from Seattle. She was the kind of person who lived by the math. She spent her days calculating how much weight a beam could take before it snapped. Precision wasn't just a job for her, it was her whole personality. She didn't just guess, she checked, double-checked, and had paper backups in waterproof sleeves. She'd been prepping for this El Cap ascent for a year, treating it like a serious project. She was getting married in April, and she wanted this checkmark on her life list before the wedding. It sounds a bit intense, but hey, we all have our own version of a before I die bucket list, right? They hit the top at 6:42 p.m. Honestly, that's late. They were behind schedule, low on water, and had been going hard for 17 hours. They could have stayed put, but they chose to descend in the dark. Bad move, but I get it. When you're thirsty and tired, you just want to be done. They took the East Ledges route, the standard way down. But in the climbing world, calling a descent standard is just a polite way of describing a route that is as tedious as it is treacherous. Rappelling in the dark is essentially playing Russian roulette with a rope, and they were already flirting with disaster. The first two rappels went off without a hitch. Then came the third. By then, they were cold, exhausted, and operating in total darkness, the perfect lethal combination for a critical lapse in judgment. They failed to confirm the ropes had reached the ledge below, missing the fact that one strand was 20 feet short. Mara went first. She backed over the edge, probably thinking the setup was fine, because they'd already made it through the first rappels and just needed to get down. But exhaustion and darkness are brutal. They make simple checks feel optional right before they become fatal. For about 65 feet, it worked. Then, she hit the end of the short rope. There was no oops moment, just gravity taking over. She fell about 26 feet onto the granite. She hit the rock, bounced, and went silent. Her partner heard one shout, then nothing. Silence is the worst sound in the world when you're hanging off a wall. By 9:17 p.m., the call was made. Search and rescue teams hauled themselves up there by 1:40 a.m. The autopsy report is, frankly, a nightmare. Massive internal damage, shattered pelvis, everything you'd expect from meeting granite at high speed. It's a violent, messy way to go. The investigators called it a rappelling error, which is just a cold way of saying that human brains are absolute garbage when they're exhausted. She was 4 rappels away from the ground. Again, 4. Her climbing partner was eventually helped off the wall by rescuers and wasn't physically injured, but can you imagine having to stay up there in the dark after watching that happen? That's the kind of thing that probably never leaves you. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to subscribe because Yosemite has a lot more dangerous places than most visitors ever realize, and somehow the next case might be the hardest one to shake. It was June 26, 2017. Tenaya Canyon is one of those places that looks totally inviting from the rim, just a nice, wide corridor of pale granite and water. From way up high you think, I could walk that, but let me tell you, that's exactly how the canyon lures you into a trap. Leo Nathan Chen was 31, a software developer from San Jose. He'd spent the previous month getting chewed out by a manager over Slack at all hours of the night. You know the feeling. You just need to get away, turn your brain off, and find some silence. He was a capable hiker. He'd done Half Dome and Cloud's Rest. But that's the thing about confidence. It's a great companion until it becomes a dangerous delusion. Leo was the kind of guy who read warning signs and immediately started calculating whether they really applied to him. He did carry a handheld GPS, but he'd loaded it with a basic park map and figured that was enough. He never bothered checking it once he got into the canyon because, in his mind, he already had the route handled. He'd screenshotted trip reports, memorized the major landmarks, and convinced himself that pulling out a device every few minutes would just slow him down. Investigation reports later showed that he had read online that Tenaya Canyon was a technical, unmaintained nightmare, and instead of staying home, he just screenshotted the route notes and headed out. The National Park Service basically screams at you to stay out of there, but at 7 in the morning, Leo walked in with a 35-liter pack and zero rope. For a couple of hours, he was fine. Then, the terrain started fighting back. The slabs got steeper, the brush turned into a wall, and suddenly, those landmarks he screenshotted didn't match the reality of the canyon. That was the moment the GPS should have come out. But by then, Leo was already in that dangerous headspace where people stop trying to verify and start trying to force reality to match the plan. He kept telling himself the next drop, the next bend, the next slab would line up. Instead of turning around, he kept pushing. By noon, he was sitting on a ledge, looking at a mess of shadows and cliffs. He wasn't having an epic adventure. He was just doing bad math, convincing himself that moving forward was easier than going back. By mid-afternoon, he was crawling across a ramp of polished granite. One slip, and gravity took over. He didn't just stumble. He went down, hit his hip, and became a human pinball, tumbling 25 feet into a chute of boulders. He ended up wedged between rocks, broken and alone. No one heard him. He just sat there, waiting for a rescue that wouldn't arrive for over 18 hours. When his car didn't move at the campsite, the host finally clued in. The autopsy was as grim as you'd expect. Shattered femur, fractured pelvis, internal bleeding. The coroner thinks he stayed alive for a few hours, just lying there, staring at the sky, realizing that the tech he carried couldn't save him from the stone. His phone had a full battery, but it was just a useless brick without a signal. His site at the camp was still booked for the next night. He never made it back to clean up his gear. It's a harsh reminder that the mountains aren't a playground. They're indifferent. You can be the smartest person in the office, but if you treat the wild like it's a software bug, you can just patch. The canyon will win every single time. It's a tragic way to get some peace and quiet, isn't it? It was September 19th, 2018. The sun was hitting the face of El Capitan just right, turning that massive chunk of granite into a glowing postcard. Down at the base, it was the usual scene. Tourists wandering around, some squinting through binoculars, others just acting like they're in a nature documentary. The air was dry and dead still, honestly kind of eerie in hindsight. Among the crowd was Luca Owen Drendel, a 50-year-old earth science teacher from Oregon. If you've ever had that one cool teacher who actually made geology interesting, that was Luca. He'd spent 20 years showing kids photos of this exact spot, teaching them about glacial erosion and rockfall mechanics. He wasn't some daredevil climber. He was just a guy who genuinely loved knowing how the planet worked. He'd finally made it to the real thing for his 25th anniversary, armed with a fancy camera and a lens big enough to see into the future. His wife, Renata, had made this trip happen after a rough year, a health scare, a few canceled plans. The whole life is short reality check. They were finally there, living the dream. They were walking the base trail, which, let's be honest, is basically walking under a giant, precariously balanced shelf of death. The Park Service has signs everywhere, and there was even an active advisory about Rockfall. But have you ever met a tourist who actually reads the fine print on a map? Exactly. They'd been lingering for about 40 minutes. Now here's the thing about mountains. They talk, but we're usually too distracted to listen. People nearby heard some faint ticking and scraping coming from high up on the wall. A few hikers even heard a couple of loud cracks right before the main event, but they just shrugged it off, assuming it was a climber kicking loose a pebble. Then it happened. 1,800 feet up, a slab of granite weighing about 3 tons decided it was tired of hanging around. It broke off due to years of freezing, thawing, and pure thermal stress. By the time it hit the bottom, it wasn't one big piece. It was a high-speed shrapnel storm. Luca had his camera raised, tracking some climbers. When that sound started, he didn't freeze. He turned, shoved Renata backward, and protected her. It's a hero move, no doubt, but nature has zero appreciation for nobility. Renata took a hard fall, breaking her wrist and getting shredded by flying debris, but she was tucked behind a tree root that saved her life. Luca wasn't as lucky. A 40-pound rock found him. It was over before he even hit the dirt. When the rescuers arrived 11 minutes later, there was nothing to do. The autopsy report is grim. Blunt force trauma, instant death. The kind of thing that reminds you how heavy a rock really is when it's falling from a mile high. The park closed the trail for 4 days. A classic, closed the door after the horse's bolted move. They found his camera in the dirt, still holding those last few photos of the climb. It's a harsh, dark irony that a man who spent his life teaching the beauty of how rocks move ended up being taken out by a piece of his own curriculum. Makes you wonder, right? You spend years studying the world, only to have it decide to settle its own debt in the blink of an eye. Does this story make you rethink the risks of being a tourist?